Hi, David Lankus coming back at you. Voices from across the sea and hopefully a country that still has a government. In any case, they've asked me to come and talk a little bit about what is a librarian and how do you define a librarian, which at this point might seem pretty ridiculous as we're a project of librarians working across borders in libraries. We think we know what we are. But there's a reason to ask this question. There's a reason to ask on a regular basis because the tools we use change, right? I mean, if we said that a librarian is someone who takes care of books, what about way back when we took care of scrolls? And what about really when we take care of databases and CDs? Defining the librarian by the tools that we use, those change. And I'm going to show you a couple of reasons because the classic way of defining what a librarian is by where they work, right? That if you look at the dictionary definition of what a librarian is, you end up with something, as I'll say in a moment, very unsatisfying, right? So here's Oxford English Dictionary, a person, typically with a degree in library science, who administers or assists in a library. It sounds on its surface like it makes sense. There are a couple of issues here. The first one is, do we really know how to define a library? A lot of people have rooms full of books in their homes that they call the library. Does that mean that they're librarians? You know, the idea that, databases, and if you're doing open source projects, they have libraries of code. Does that mean that everyone who codes is a librarian? So this idea of defining someone by where they work doesn't work very well. We also have the situation that if you typically have a library science degree, there are countries participating in this very project that don't have formal library science degree programs at the undergraduate or graduate level. I'm looking at you, Netherlands. And so that means that we can't really use that as a definition as well. So I've always sort of said that this way of defining what a librarian is, by starting by defining what a library is, it's unsatisfying. Right? There are plenty of librarians who work outside of libraries, working for large vendors, OCLC, different companies, working in industry, doing patent busting, doing group work, data scientists, people with their library science degree that aren't in a physical building. And so, are they librarians? There are also plenty of librarians without a degree. As I mentioned, several countries even participating here. And what about people who are working in and assist a library, but they're not necessarily doing the work of the library? They're clerks and aides and security and janitors, which are invaluable to the work we do, but oftentimes we don't define them as librarians. So we need to do a better job of defining what a librarian is. And what I'm going to tell you is if we move it outside of this focus on collections of materials into the idea of values and our mission, we get a much more satisfying and different answer. So just, putting it out there on what is a librarian. This is a quote I've been sent around, attributed to me. It's true. But I've long contended that a room full of books is simply a closet, but that an empty room with a librarian serving their community in it is a library. Now, that empty, I did this because one time on a weekend I was in church and I went past a room that was locked and dark and a little sign says library on it. Was that really a library or was that just a room full of books? I mean, whether people go in or utilize it doesn't really matter. The point is that it's a collection of stuff waiting. I mean, if that's how we define what a library is a collection of stuff, hoarders get to fit this category. And I don't think, well, many of us may have those tendencies. We want to just define librarians as hoarders in fancy buildings, right? That empty room with a librarian in it, probably with an internet connection, they might well build collections and websites and libguides and all these things very quickly, but it's their function, their task, and how they go about it that's defining the library. Because in the end of the day, there are really three ways to become a librarian. You can either do it by title. We have a lot of people that are hired as librarians. I work, that's what my title is, that's what it's been negotiated. I'm a librarian because I have that title. We also have people that become librarians by degree. That means they get a library science degree. So they're librarians because they paid tuition. And I think that all too often we ignore the librarian by spirit. That is, people who truly want to serve the community in a way very aligned with what librarians do, but they may not have the title or the job, but they're there to improve the communities. So let me run you through two different ways, and they're complementary, of defining a librarian, and you're going to hear more as you're meeting already in different ways of preparing them. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is something called the Salzburg curriculum. And the Salzburg curriculum was developed out of the Salzburg Institute by a group of international librarians and museum specialists. And then we began asking, what is a librarian and what is a museum professional? Because it turns out there's a really strong overlap. And this is the skill set that we felt it was necessary to be a librarian. First, transformative social engagement, which is a big fancy word of saying an understanding that our role as a librarian is to affect positively our community. Not to be neutral, not to be unbiased, not to sit back and wait, but to actively go out and engage in defining what better is and making it happen. And that advocacy skill is important to modern librarianship, particularly as we're talking about it. Technology skills. Really simple definition is the ability to build a virtual presence around your library functions or what you're trying to do. That technology skills can skew on a very broad range from people who are doing cataloging and information organization, those are technologies, controlled vocabularies, to those who are doing metadata analysis and algorithm development and web development. Management for participation, that is, how do we manage people, how do we manage processes, how do we manage a forum for interacting? So how do we run an organization? Asset management, which is a lot of how we typically think and where that Oxford English Dictionary centers us on librarianship, taking care of stuff, collections, books, materials, maps, etc. But it can go far beyond. We were talking with some of these museum specialists, and they were talking about different communities that their assets that they're collecting are tribal masks that aren't just there to look at, but they're used in ceremonies. On a sort of opposite extreme, there are libraries here in the U.S., public libraries in tourism areas where they loan out fishing rods because that's a major area, a major pastime, if you will, in that area. Baking pans, medical devices. There are university libraries that loan out things like dissected cats, that loan out skeletons, that loan out lab equipment because they're learning about anatomy and physiology. So how do you take care of that? It's not simply as simple as saying, well, we have books and we put them on shelves, because what do you do with all this other realia and other material? Cultural skills, and that's a lot of what we're talking about in Newcomer. How do we connect to communities, learn what communities want to do, and speak to them in a way that they feel empowered, that they feel recognized, and that they're willing to move forward? I mean, really, if you think about it, the heart of this project is those cultural skills that we're developing. And finally, knowledge, learning, and innovation skills, that we understand that we are in a knowledge building process, which means we understand instruction and pedagogy. We understand that a lot of what we do is about innovation, coming up with new ways of doing these things and new ways and adapting ideas from around the world into our local setting. But let me break this down just to a little bit more easy to remember way of doing that. And that is, I want you to think of a librarian as the intersection between three things. Between a mission, that is why we do things, methods, means how we do things, and values, which is really what reflects in the how and why that we do things and how we declare what we're ultimately about. So breaking this down really quickly, the mission of a librarian is to improve society through facilitating knowledge creation in his or her communities. Knowledge creation is a big word, just throw in learning. Our job is to make a better society, better through adult education, particularly with new citizens or in disadvantaged communities or not often accessed communities. That mission is to make life better, to help people find meaning in their lives and to help whole communities make better, stronger decisions. To weave together how communities work and what they do, which, once again, given the events going on in the United States, we as a country can use a lot of this work. But there are lots of people seeking to improve society, whether it's through commerce or whether it's through government, whether it's through not-for-profit work. Teachers certainly can talk about, publishers, firemen, policemen. All of these people can claim that this is their mission. We do it specifically through knowledge creation, through learning. That is, it's not about what we give or what we build, except in terms of how we build people's understanding. Which, by the way, means that if you're seeking to evaluate how good of a job you do, you can't look at the job you do, you have to look at the impact within the community. Our value is measured in the impact and work enabled within our communities. So once again, that mission isn't alone sufficient to define what a librarian is, because teachers fit into this, college professors fit into this, mentors fit into this. And that's good, because people sharing that mission or aspects of that mission means that we have this sort of ready cadre of different disciplines and communities that we can pull together to make those communities better. But it's insufficient. So in addition to this mission, we have to talk about how we implement this mission. And that's our means of facilitation. That is, how do we go about it? And really what we're trying to do is bridge 4 knowledge divides, or digital divides, if you will. The first one is access, that we provide access to materials, to people, to collections, to things, to databases. We provide access to stuff. And we do that through collection development and purchasing and licensing, as well as content creation and making videos like this and sharing with our communities. And we can go through lots of examples. I was just talking with the Chattanooga Public Library here in the States. What they've started doing during the pandemic, when their physical facilities were closed, was they began creating videos on everything from book groups and book learning to Tai Chi to Dungeons and Dragons and gaming. And part of what the librarian does is they provide access to this. So they provide it through a website. They sometimes provide access literally in loaning out things like Wi-Fi hotspots and providing broadband connectivity to rural communities. That's a means of access. Now, this isn't radical, because for many centuries, librarians have almost focused exclusively on that access as their mission, bringing things together, pooling resources in a community and paying for expensive databases and resources. But access is insufficient, and I'll use the digital divide concept here. That is, trying to get people connected on the internet. Simply providing someone with a laptop or a phone or a wire that accesses the internet isn't sufficient. They don't know how to use it. It's useless. In the United States, when we began bringing technology into the classroom for primary and secondary teachers, they would show up at the first day of class, they'd put a computer on the desk of the teacher, and they'd say, "Go, be brilliant, use technology in the classroom." They provided access. The problem was the teacher didn't know how to use it, how to turn it on. They were uncomfortable not knowing that in front of a classroom of students that probably did know that. So access is insufficient. They eventually learned that what happens is you actually take a laptop, you give it to the teacher at the end of the school year, you have them take it home and use it to do everything from billing to gaming to Netflix to preparing their classroom. So when they show up on the first day of class, they have a familiarity and comfort with it. And so that's our second means of facilitation, how we provide knowledge, or if you want, training, right? So access is they have access to our collections. Knowledge is they know how to read, or they know how to use the different way we classify things. That they know when they go online, they may need to learn foreign languages, so they know how to use things like Google Translate or language acquisition software. It's why we offer workshops in basic technology skills or job finding skills or all of these things to our newer citizens. But this alone isn't enough. So they may have access to it, they may know how to use it, but do they feel safe in using that? And this is where a lot of the principles of librarianship around privacy come in. You know, they may have access to a collection, they may know how to find a book they want, but they're worried that people are going to watch what they are reading. They're going to get suppressed because they don't feel comfortable doing it. I mentioned before the teacher using that technology in front of a classroom of students. That environment where they don't feel comfortable basically screwing up in front of a class of students, that's a negative environment. We've all worked in an environment where we want to learn and innovate and try new things, but our administration doesn't want to do that, or we don't have the funding, or that's not how we do things here. That environment can quash knowledge building, can quash learning. Lastly is motivation. That is, I may have access to the computer. I may have lessons on how to use the computer, and I might feel safe and even encouraged to use it, but I don't want to. I don't want to because I got plenty to do, or, oh, that's the thing we're doing this week, what's next week? And we've all encountered this in the library world, right? We were all supposed to do, different kinds of books and technologies, and maker spaces were going to change the world, and now it's going to be Zoom sessions are going to change the world, and what's next? Let's just wait it out. What is it in me that's going to drive me to do this, and how can I incent my community to learn, to come in, to engage in services? How can I encourage and recognize them and build up their own confidence? So once again, our mission, which is to improve society through knowledge creation, tied to means of how we do that. And once again, you can say, well, Dave, that's great, but once again, that mission wasn't exclusive to librarians. These means certainly aren't. I mean, that fits, once again, education. It fits Google. Google can certainly argue, Facebook can certainly argue, well, we're about knowledge creation. We're about helping you find and access materials. We're about giving you basic training, all of this other stuff. So that's itself also not sufficient. So we have to marry it with a third definitional, defining attribute. And those are the values in which we bring to this. Because while Google and Facebook may share parts of our mission and may share parts of our means, they really don't share a lot of our values in terms of privacy and making sure that people succeed and the profit isn't driving access, those kinds of things. So we have a series of values that we are very transparent. We make them available. We express them as well as enact them. Things like learning. We're centrally about knowledge creation. Things like openness. We believe access to a wide variety of resources. We fight censorship. We want to acquire lots of materials that the individual may not be able to afford. Intellectual honesty. That is, we don't go for conspiracy theories and spread disinformation. And we used to use the phrase unbiased, but I want to be really clear that a librarian is not unbiased. A librarian is biased. We have a series of values that we push toward, that idea of open access to information regardless of the ability to pay. The fight against censorship, the preservation of privacy. I mean, if we could do data collection on what everyone's reading and what they're doing in our libraries and resell it, that might get us more resources, but it violates our values in doing that. And so we are not unbiased. We have an agenda for an improved community. But we're intellectually honest in that we should be able to interrogate it, we should be rational about it, we should look beyond conspiracy theories as a way of doing this. Intellectual freedom and safety, that we want libraries to be a safe place to explore dangerous ideas. We want people to be able to come into the library, whether it's physically or online, and we want them to be able to try things and fail at them. A lot of learning occurs through failure. But we want them to feel safe in doing that. So no one's going to laugh at them, no one's going to penalize them, no one's going to discard them. They can try again and try again and try again. That's what we mean by intellectual safety. And physical safety is we want people to come in and feel like they have the ability to learn without someone looking over their shoulder, without anyone threatening them. We're not only a civic space, we're a civil space. We want to have civil conversations. And lastly, diversity. Diversity not only in terms of ethnicity, religion, creed, but also diversity in terms of ideas and addressing those ideas and bringing them together. We know that the richest, best learning occurs in the most diverse information sources available to us. And so we honor that in not only who we hire, who we train, who we serve, but also in the materials and where the origin and expression come in. So this is another way of thinking about what is a librarian in this community-centric, participatory way. We have a mission, we have a means of implementing that, and we have values that guide us in that implementation. So at the end of the day, now what we're talking about is a librarian. We didn't define it by books and where we do it. We didn't define it by the building and its characteristic or the collection. We didn't define it specifically by you can do information organization and you can do this. We defined it by a mission, values, and the means which we implement them. And so as we have our discussion in this project about how do we adapt and bring things within our community, let us constantly remind ourselves, are we providing access? Fine, but are we also providing people the knowledge to use the resources we're creating, the services we're creating? Do we create an environment where they're safe to do so? And do we build on motivation so they feel like they want to do it, so they are passionate about what they're doing? And we do that with our values that are throughout that process. Now, whether you get that through a library science degree, whether you get that through these kinds of professional development, or whether somehow it's genetically encoded in you by title, by education, by spirit, doesn't matter as much as what we seek to do. Anyway, I look forward to the conversation. If some of this doesn't make sense, let me know. We can continue our conversation. Thanks a lot.